Okay. So, the art of listening. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I came to CoDA March 16th, 1989. I was 26 years old. I was ready to drive my car off a cliff over some guy that I can't even remember his name. And since then, I've had an amazing journey of recovery and getting married, getting divorced, becoming a parent in recovery. It's been quite a ride. And the art of listening has been a really exciting journey for me, and I'm looking forward to sharing about that. But before I begin, I would like to touch on a couple things. I'm calling them housekeeping. One of the things that we're going to be doing in a little bit is some brainstorming. And I've never done this workshop electronically before. I've only done it in person. And so we're limiting our sharing during the brainstorming portion to about 30 seconds. And I think somebody else will be talking about how that goes once we get to that. But I did want to let people know that when we're in the brainstorming session, we're looking at it as more of an opportunity to share ideas and concepts rather than big, long shares. My goal is to leave time at the end, as is common here, so that there is time for people to share about their experiences. And there will be some breakout sessions where you'll be in rooms and doing some exercises. Next is self-care. I'm very big on self-care. If anybody in this place gets triggered, I want you to take care of yourself, whatever that means. If it means that you need to leave for a minute, you need to shut off your video, whatever, I don't anticipate that will happen. However, I also know about real life and getting blindsided. Of course, if you need to get up and take a comfort break, you need to get something to take care of yourself, please do it. I won't be offended. In fact, I really can't see you very well because of the nature of Zoom. So there's not a lot of room for me to be offended if you get up and leave the room, okay? And the last thing, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time that I'm presenting this workshop on the Zoom platform. I am accustomed to doing this face-to-face. And so what I would ask for from our group, and that means everybody attending, is flexible collaboration. And the idea behind that is that we would be flexible as we're implementing and doing new things, and that we would have the willingness to collaborate and work together. I know that sometimes frustrations can rise, and it can be difficult to want the higher good for the group. And so my hope is that we will be able to work together as a team, all of us, not just the people on the committee, and work to make this happen. Okay, next slide. As part of my presentation, I'll be bringing in different proverbs and wise sayings from people, or in this case, cultures. If speaking is silver, then listening is gold. The art of listening. So my reason for starting this way came out of my desire to make this workshop really awesome. And I wanted to do something really exciting and extravagant, and I wanted to go all out. So I was trying to think of all these amazing things to do. And it came to me that simple was going to be better. And so at this time, what we're going to start our brainstorm and discussion with is, what does listening mean to you? going to pause us here for a moment. And you know what really came out of this that I found very insightful was the acknowledgement of withholding expressions, intimacy ends, feeling less interested in starting a conversation, and that it can be even sometimes difficult to regain. And so I wanted to take that somewhere for a minute. So we talk about what happens to a relationship when listening stops. When intimacy ends, what's left?
I love them.
Okay, so the art of listening. Every good conversation starts with good listening. So a lot of this next section, I'm going to be introducing some sort of story or personal experience and then following through with some topics and ideas. Just as a brief recap, we talked about what does listening mean to you? Of what happens when someone doesn't listen. I was sitting at home. I called off just for a moment for people to kind of be reminded of some of the things that we were then married. And he said he'd been hit by a car. Just a touch. He was about a block and a half away. The whole page there. And I knew that he was on his motorcycle that day. Then we went from there to I had a 9-year-old son at home. What happens to a relationship when listening stops and disconnections I got him in the car because I didn't feel comfortable leaving him home alone, and I rushed. I'll be editing a little bit myself. And what I saw was what came out of that was that intimacy would leave, and what happened when intimacy ends. I will do my best not to go into too much detail because I don't think that's necessary. But I think it just to basically explain to you, the car had pinned him up against a minivan. There for a moment. He took the entire brunt of the crash on his lower left leg. He had an open fracture, and the person who did it was there. Yeah, I did spell that right. Okay. I later found out that he had left and come back. I highlighted a couple of words because I wanted to remember them to talk about. When someone becomes defensive, what happens to communication and listening? He told me he was so sorry that he had done this. And then went on to what happens to relationships. To be really honest with you, my focus was trying to help my then husband. And I said, okay, just go over there. And the next thing I know, the police won't allow me to talk to him. And it turns out that this is a crime. And then we went to what happened and kind of ended here. Toxicity in relationships as it relates to not listening, a gun or into to their house. In general, how does toxicity creep in? And when he heard a motorcycle take off. So he and his cousin hopped in the car to go find the guy on the motorcycle who did this. I am now going to shift. They came around a corner as the ex-husband was driving to work. His name was JD. I'm going to stop share and go back to my. They used their car to stop him. PowerPoint and begin with the because they assumed that he was the one who did it. When I found out that this was an on purpose and not an accident, I'm going to be very honest with you. My recovery kind of went out the window. I saw this young man. He was 25 at the time. He was smaller than me. He was sitting on the curb, and I was sure I could take him. And I was ready to beat the living shit out of him. Excuse my language. I went to a place, and I heard a voice in my mind, in my head, and it said, God's people don't act this way. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. And I stopped, and I'm going to stop the story there and continue it a little later. In how to listen to God, what came up for me when I started considering this topic was that I do a really good job of talking to God. I learned in recovery how to pray. And I don't know about y'all, but that was one of the early things I learned was, you know, we got to pray. We got to reach out to our higher power. When I came into CoDA, I was a very broken woman, as I mentioned at the very beginning. And I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know how to talk to God. I didn't even know that there was a God anymore. That's a whole nother story. And in my mind, because of some experiences that I had, if there was a God, he sure wasn't listening to me anymore because of the things I had done that I was just beyond. And so I got really good in my early recovery about how to talk to God. And in fact, I did a lot of talking to God, a lot. But the part that was missing for me was how to listen to God. And I chose this quote here because we hear this a lot in program. At least I do. I'll speak of my own experience, so forgive me for the we. I have heard this a lot, that prayer is when you talk to God and meditation is when you listen to God. And, you know, I think that's really awesome to acknowledge that. But you know what my problem was? I didn't know how to listen to God. I didn't even know what it meant to listen to God. And did God talk to everybody in the same way? I don't know. So I kind of went on a journey around this. And so in my process of learning how to listen for God, there were 3 key points that I brought up on the slide that I'm going to develop. We need to stop talking, first of all. We need to learn to recognize God / higher power / question mark, whatever you choose to call that power greater than you. I needed to learn how to recognize that voice. And then from there, I needed to build the relationship. And so as I'm talking and I'm having you guys interact and do some stuff, I would really like us to be thinking about some of those things that we talked about that interfere with listening, some of those behaviors that happen that interfere with building a relationship. Okay, so with that, let's move on. I just need to pray more. I don't know about y'all, but I have heard this a lot from men and women that I have sponsored over the years. You know, they'll be talking about behaviors that have come back up. I happen to be a recovering alcoholic as well. So whether it was codependent behaviors or alcoholism or using again, you know, if they picked up again or if they picked up a behavior again, I just need to pray more and then I'll be okay. And one of the things that really got me about that was, you know, if I could talk my way into recovery and if I could intellectualize and do that whole thing, you guys wouldn't see me right now because I would have done it already. And so there really is a time to listen. There is a time for prayer, and I'm a firm believer in that. And many of you that know me will know this. I believe in prayer. I know that prayer is a powerful tool. But I always have this sense that there was this imbalance and I needed to learn to listen. How do I listen for what God would have me to? What does step 3 tell us? You know, we're turning our will and our life over to God. And step 11 says, you know, I need to find out what God's will is for me and ask for that and the power to, well, how do I know? How do I know what his will is for me? And from that, once I figure it out, I need to allow my higher power to work in my life. And how do I do that? How do I let that voice in? How do I start seeking out and recognizing what that is? So this is where I want to do a breakout and break into groups, into rooms of 2 to 3 people. I don't know how many we have right now. Where are we at? Do we have a lot?
Hi, Lisa, it's Lori. I'll do the breakout rooms for you. We have 74 people.
Okay, so can we do 2 per room, or is that too many rooms?
That's too many rooms. Can we do, we'll do 3 and not everyone goes in them. So they'll have at least 2 or 3 people in them.
Okay, so let's do 3. And this is what I would like you to do. The idea here is that if I'm talking and my higher power is trying to talk to me at the same time and we're talking at the same time, somebody's not listening, and it's probably me as the human. And so what I want to do is have you experience what it's like to try and talk and listen at the same time. So I want to say thank you to everybody. I'd like you to go into the breakout room, who went into the room, everybody and gave it an effort. And spend 30 to 60 seconds trying to talk and listen at the same time. Oh, you must do it or else, or you're not going to. And then after that's everybody's over, I want each person to have an opportunity to talk while the others listen. This is the first time that I've had people say I just couldn't do it because of my history, and it makes so much sense to me. And I respect, again, the transparency, the vulnerability, the willingness to talk about your experiences during the brainstorming session. In my group, we had 4 people in my group was around that, and one of them said that she could hear a couple words, not attached to the topic so much as just the exercise. There was another woman who said she had to block talking at the same time and trying to listen at the same time, and then break that down and have one person talk and the others listen. Yeah, those were some of the things that we focused on, and it was definitely a radically different experience when we did the one at a time and listening to the other, because we were actually able to hear what someone was saying. And so when we think about our relationship with a higher power, and at some point we have to stop talking in order to be able to hear our higher power. And honestly, this was the point of doing the exercise, was to really bring that home, that if we are indeed seeking out what our higher power wants for us, is trying to communicate to us, we've got to be able to listen. And so with that, I'm going to move to the next point, which is to learn to recognize God, HP, or whatever you choose to call your higher power's voice. And so I have a story called 7 Lisas and the Answering Machine. So my generation of women, girls, the name Lisa was very popular. And at one point in my life, I had 7 friends named Lisa. And so this is going to date me a little bit, but when I first got into recovery, you know, those beautiful cell phones we have that you can send text messages and video chat, and some of you are on your phones right now. We didn't have any of that. All we had was answering machines. And the answering machines had little tapes in them because I didn't have a digital one yet. And I don't know if any of you who are in my generation or around there, those tapes did not have very solid recording quality. And so one of my Lisa friends would call and say, "Hey, it's Lisa, how you doing? Call me, bye." And they'd hang up. And the quality of the tape was so poor that I couldn't tell whose voice it was. And I'm like, oh my gosh, which Lisa was it? And I would have to scroll through, and sometimes I would, hey, did you call me the other day? And so I share that story because the importance of recognizing voice is important when it comes to my relationship with higher power. And please note that I put voice in quotation marks because I don't want to assume, presume, whatever word we want to throw in there, that that your higher power is going to communicate to you through a voice. Okay. And so in my experience personally, I shared at the beginning of the story, the internal voice that I heard. For me, sometimes that is how higher power has communicated with me. Sometimes it's been through images. Mm-hmm. It might be an intuitive feeling or a sense. And then I threw other in there because I have learned from doing this workshop a couple times that people have come up with some amazing ways that their higher power speaks to them. And in the beginning, I wouldn't necessarily have known that it was my higher power speaking to me. But over time, I have come to know that by pausing and listening. So what I would like to do at this point is to ask for any of our participants here, your experience. How does your higher power communicate with you? Thank you. So I'm going to throw out something that a longtime CoDA member from Canada had shared with me one time when he was trying to discern the difference between his will and God's will internally. And he talked about calm certainty versus chaotic urgency. And I have found that to be a wise gauge for what's coming from my higher power or what could be coming from me. So in addition to recognizing the voice, and I use that in quotes, or however your higher power communicates to you, I suggest writing it down. Write down what you think higher power is communicating to you. I see a fuzzy pink something. And then I also recommend checking it out with somebody else. It's okay, don't worry. It was super cute, little blue eyes. Yeah, it was very cute. Check it out with somebody else. Run it by a sponsor, a trusted CoDA friend. If you have a spiritual practice and you have a spiritual advisor that you would seek out, speak with your spiritual advisor. My total goal for this workshop was that it would open up for everyone the ability, the idea, the notion that you too can have a relationship with your higher power, and you too can learn to listen for your higher power's guidance in your life. So I really want to open it up in the broadest way possible. Moving on to the final point I wanted to develop, build the relationship. I found this quote when I was looking for some wisdom about listening. The word listen has the same letters as the word silent. And something about that was very touching for me. So I found a book. I found a book that talked about listening in prayer. And it had a group of 30 exercises in it. And I did one exercise every day for 30 days. And it was through this process that I developed the sense of my higher power's voice and how higher power had been speaking to me. I call my higher power God. This particular book had a specific religious tenet to it, which wasn't offensive to me. I didn't have a problem with it. But what I learned from it was so profound for me and changed my life so deeply that I had a desire in my heart to bring it to my fellow recovering people who might not have that same religious background. And I was really motivated to bring it to others in recovery, to have an opportunity to experience what I did. And so with this 30 days of doing this, there were some things that I discovered in my relationship with God. And it translated to what I've learned about relationships in general in CoDA. Relationships need time. I have found in my recovery in the last 10 to 15 years, you all may have heard of these dating apps. I don't even know if I'm still connected. Am I still here? Okay, thanks. It's really hard on Zoom sometimes. Please forgive me, everyone. There's these dating apps, and I've sponsored quite a few women who have been on these dating apps, and they're looking for this instant connection and this instant relationship. And how many times these women have been rejected because the person on the other end, whether it was a man or a woman, would basically say, oh, there wasn't an instant spark, I'm moving on. I'm like, what? And I know that that's what I suffered from when I got here, was that I thought that's what was supposed to happen in relationships. Well, if you think about a relationship with God, it's going to need time to develop, just like a relationship with a partner or a relationship with a coworker or even a relationship with people in our family. It takes time. It takes time to develop that. And so I really learned from doing the exercises in this book that it really requires time, which means I need to carve time out of my life to do this. And I haven't always done a really good job of that. Relationships need attention. So not only do they need time, like I'm going to carve out the time, but I actually need to give my attention. And so if we think about some of the things that we talked about through the brainstorming, listening to listen, not listening to respond, right? That's communicating attention. Asking questions. I remember several people talking about asking probing questions or asking questions for clarification. We can do that in our relationship with a higher power too. So relationships need attention. That means that we need to seek out and choose to have that time with. Time and attention kind of go together. But it's possible to spend time with somebody but not really give our attention, right? And I remember somebody saying the most beautiful thing: put the phone down, you know, turn off the TV, whatever it is, turn off the video games, whatever it is that's keeping us from giving that attention to our higher power. Get rid of it and really focus in on what that means. I know for me, sometimes my life can get so hectic that I actually have to put it in the calendar, Lisa time or time for God or prayer and meditation. And then finally, relationships need consistency. You know, it's all well and good to say, yeah, you know, well, I get around to it when I get around to it. Well, imagine being a parent to a child and say, well, son, I'll get around to your dinner, you know, when I get to it. I got other stuff going on right now. Or I hear that you're having some feelings, but I got to deal with this over here. And I'll get to that in a minute. What's going to happen to the relationship? And think about our partners. Think about the boss when he says, hey, will you take care of this for me? Yeah, boss, I'll get to that in a minute. You know, I got this other stuff going on. And so consistency is really important. And I know that ideally I'd like to do this every day, and I'm going to be honest that I don't. My life has become something else, but I have had periods of time where I did a really good job of daily spending time with my higher power. And when I do that, I become more familiar with my higher power's voice, with the way my higher power speaks to me. And when I become more familiar with it, I'm able to recognize it and I'm able to connect with it more quickly. Think, in addition to, we talked about connection in the brainstorming. And if we don't do time, attention, and consistency, I find that connection's lost. And I realize that it can be different for other people. It can be different for different relationships. Oh, my phone decided to ring. I'm sorry. Anyway, so in order to keep that connection and to continue to be able to have that relationship with a higher power, I have found that these things are important that I'm describing here: time, attention, and consistency. Moving forward, warning. Sometimes we can get distortions. I called them distortions just to keep it simple. And it kind of relates back to writing it down and checking it out with somebody else. You know, in the beginning, especially when I wasn't very familiar with my higher power's voice, I would think, oh, God wants me to do this, you know, and I could go rush off and try to do that and go, oh, that didn't go so well. And so I really encourage people not only to check it out with somebody else, write it down, check it out, but use the steps and the traditions of our program to guide. You know, if I have a sense that I'm supposed to do something, but it doesn't really line up with the principles there, I might want to pause. I might want to consider, is this really what my higher power would have me do? Or is this my thought, my will, what I want to have done? Because it can be challenging to figure it out in the beginning. So really reach out for people around you that you trust, whether it's a sponsor, trusted code of friends, spiritual advisor, seek out the steps, the traditions, even consider if there's spiritual literature within your faith or your belief system. Seek that out as well. There can be avoidance. Those of us who want to avoid or tend towards avoidance, we can, I'll speak for myself, I can find anything and use it to take the place of my time with God. Anything. I can think of social media games. I can think of cleaning the kitchen. I can think of just anything else but, right? Because it can be kind of scary. I'll be transparent here with you as well. There are times when I've been afraid to listen to my higher power because I didn't want to hear what he had to say, because I was pretty sure that my higher power was going to direct me down some path that I didn't really want to go. And so avoidance can come up. And if it does, face it, talk about it, talk to a sponsor. We got those steps, we've got those traditions, we've got meetings, we've got literature, we've got so much to support us in our relationship with our higher power. And finally, obstacles. I find in my own personal recovery, as well as in many of the sponsor-sponsee relationships I have, that, you know what the main obstacle is time. It's just carving out the time for that relationship. And some of the things that get in the way, well, I can't see God. God's not coming down here talking to me. And, you know, some of those more concrete human interactions that many people want and demand even. And so doubly so that it takes discipline, commitment, and I think a level of faith to really reach out and go to that place and say, you know what, I'm going to make this time. I'm going to do this. So these are some of the things that I've learned from my own personal experience. I kind of wanted to follow up on the standing in the street story. I later came to realize that that was my higher power speaking to me. And I had been in recovery at that point for about 10, I think about 17 years actually at that point. And it was one of the first times I can recall having an experience where my higher power clearly spoke to me inside my mind. And it was very clear that I was not supposed to beat the living crap out of this kid who did this thing. And it kind of set me on a journey. It set me on a journey to really consider how my higher power speaks to me and communicates with me. The outcome of that story is that, of course, my ex-husband wound up in the hospital. He was there for 9.5 weeks. He eventually lost his leg and became an amputee. The person who tried to play it off as an accident, where it eventually turned into a crime, he was put in jail for 10 years, got out in 4. And I'm saddened to say that the marriage didn't hold up, and I believe that part of what happened, you know, led to the demise of the marriage. It wasn't all of it. But I do acknowledge and affirm that my higher power spoke to me that day. And my higher power spoke to me through that entire experience. I made a choice in that moment to say, God, I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to say it's your fault. I'm going to look for you every day. I'm going to look for how you're working in my life every day. And I have to tell you that some of the most miraculous things happened in my life, because instead of blaming God and saying, God, why would you do this to us? I said, God, you didn't do this to us. Somebody else made a choice. How are you going to show up? How are you going to reveal who you are to me and to my family at that time? And so in closing, acquiring proficiency with new skills takes practice. It takes time. It's not instant like the dating relationships I was talking about with you. Sometimes I've been angry with God. Sometimes I've been afraid to hear what my higher power had to say. Sometimes I've been joyful. Putting together this workshop, originally, I told you all that I had this idea of how I thought it should be. And it was actually my higher power who guided me. The first half of the workshop, I wanted to do all these amazing interactions and exercises. And it was like, no, just do a brainstorm. I'm like, what? It's like, do a brainstorm. And I went, okay. Got my big Post-it sheets and went at it. And here's what we have. So with that, I would like to humbly thank the committee for asking me to come and give this workshop. I would like to humbly thank everybody who participated, and showing up is participation. Even if you didn't share, it's participation. You're here, and I appreciate you. I appreciated everybody who was willing to be vulnerable, transparent, and share your personal experience, and say thank you. And with that, I am done.